The stars shimmered above Earth as the mighty Draxian fleet arrived. 10,000 warships, massive, armored, and armed with weapons strong enough to burn entire planets, hung in orbit like silent predators. They had conquered dozens of worlds before. Earth would be no different. From the bridge of his flagship, High General Varrock looked down at the blue planet. His yellow reptilian eyes narrowed. This was supposed to be a glorious victory, but something felt wrong. An empty battlefield. "Report," Varrock growled. A Draxian officer checked the scanners. No defense systems detected. No planetary shields. No warships. Varrock bared his fangs in a grin. Pathetic. The humans have nothing. For centuries, the galaxy had whispered about Earth, the lost world of a dangerous species, but no one had seen humans in generations. Some believed they had gone extinct. Others thought they were myths. Varrock didn't care. He was here to crush whatever remained. He turned to his fleet commanders. "Prepare the invasion. The planet will fall before the next cycle." Across the fleet, the order was sent. Dropships launched. Thousands of Draxian warriors descended toward the silent cities. And that's when the first ship vanished. A silent attack. It happened in an instant. One moment, Draxian warship Varkus 12 was in formation. The next, it was gone. No explosion. No distress signal. Just nothing. "Commander, we lost contact with Varkus 12. A communications officer reported. Varrock's eyes darkened. "What do you mean lost contact?" The officer's claws trembled over his console. It just disappeared, General." Varrock's tail flicked in irritation. "A system failure. Send another squad to investigate." A second squad moved toward the coordinates where Varkus 12 had been. Then they disappeared too. The bridge went silent. The unseen enemy. Fear was not something Draxians felt easily. They were warriors, conquerors, but now something unseen was hunting them. Varrock slammed his fist on the command table. "All ships, hold position. Do not engage until we understand what is happening." Across the fleet, warships stopped moving. The Draxians waited. And then, the messages began. A deep, eerie hum filled the communication channels. Faint whispers, in an old human language, echoed through the fleet. No one spoke that language anymore. But the Draxians understood the meaning. "You were warned." Varrock's claws tightened. "Find the source of that transmission. Now." His officers worked quickly. But the signal wasn't coming from one location. It was coming from everywhere. Then, without warning, 3 more warships disappeared. Panic spread through the fleet. Warriors who had fought 100 battles now gripped their weapons, feeling something new for the first time. Fear, a trap in the darkness. Varrock took a deep breath. "Enough of this. Begin planetary bombardment. Burn the surface to the ground." The fleet prepared to fire. Thousands of plasma cannons locked onto Earth's cities. Energy built up. Weapons glowed, ready to unleash destruction. Then, blackness. Every screen, every light, every power source in the fleet shut down. Darkness swallowed the Draxian warships. For the first time, Varrock felt it. This was no ordinary enemy. Something old was waiting for them. And now, it was awake. The darkness stretched across the fleet like a living shadow, swallowing every screen, every light, every trace of power. The mighty warships of the Draxian Empire, vessels that had conquered worlds and reduced civilizations to ash, now hung silent and blind above Earth. Panic spread through the command decks. Officers barked orders. Warriors clawed at malfunctioning controls. But nothing responded. Even emergency backup systems refused to activate. It was as if some unseen force had reached into the heart of each warship and extinguished its very soul. Varrock stood frozen, his claws digging into the steel railing of his command deck. This was impossible. The Draxians had faced planetary shields, cyber warfare, gravity traps, and enemy fleets, but never had their ships been silenced like this. He turned to his chief engineer, who frantically worked at his console, his scaled hands trembling. "General," the engineer stammered, "this is not a mechanical failure. Something is blocking us." Varrock growled low, his sharp teeth flashing. "Blocking us? From where?" The engineer hesitated before answering. "Everywhere." Then the whispers returned. They slithered through the dead silence of the fleet, creeping into every communication channel, every speaker, every helmet. Faint, distorted, and speaking in an old Earth language, they were impossible to ignore. Some of the younger warriors, who had never believed in the myths of Earth, began to shake. Others gripped their weapons, as if they could fight a voice. Varrock's second in command, Commander Axelrath, slammed his fist against the console. "Enough of this sorcery." He turned to the general. "We must send ground troops. Whatever is down there, we will burn it from the surface." Varrock hesitated. Something in his instincts screamed this was wrong. But he was a warrior of the Empire, and the Empire did not fear ghosts. He nodded. "Deploy ground forces. Secure the planet. Kill anything that resists." Across the dead fleet, the orders were relayed through backup manual systems. The massive Draxian troop carriers opened their deployment bays, releasing thousands of soldiers into Earth's atmosphere. Their drop pods descended like burning meteors, falling toward the abandoned cities, the silent streets, and the ruins covered in eerie mist. As the first troops landed, their helmets flickered with static, their suits picking up movement in the distance. But their scanners showed nothing alive. Empty streets stretched ahead. Broken human structures loomed in the mist, covered in centuries of decay. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their weapons raised. A squad moved through the ruins of what seemed to be an ancient human city. Their leader, Captain Veltor, signaled his unit forward. "Eyes open. Stay in formation." But then a shadow moved. It was fast, too fast. One moment, it was at the edge of their vision. The next, it was gone. The soldiers spun in confusion. What was that? One of them hissed, "Stay sharp." Veltor commanded, but his voice wavered. Then something spoke, not through their communicators, not through technology, but through the air itself. A voice, deep and unnatural, whispering inside their helmets, inside their skulls. It spoke in the old tongue of humanity. The words were cold, emotionless, but filled with a terrifying certainty. "You were warned." Then they attacked. The shadows came alive. Not human, not alien, something else. Figures ripped from the darkness moved with inhuman speed, tearing through the Draxian soldiers before they could even react. Their weapons fired wildly, but the enemy did not fall. Energy blasts vanished into the mist as if the air itself was swallowing them. Screams filled the communication channels, desperate cries of warriors who had never known fear until now. Veltor's last transmission was filled with static, his voice shaking. "They are here." Then silence. Above, on the flagship, Varrock and his officers listened in horror as one by one. The squads went dark. No bodies, no explosions, just disappearance. Varrock clenched his fists, his tail lashing. "What is happening down there?" No one answered, because no one knew. The fleet, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, was being hunted. And the worst part, they still hadn't seen their enemy. The whispers grew louder. The fleet remained powerless. And deep within the mist-covered ruins of Earth, something was waking up. Varrock paced the darkened bridge of his warship, his claws clicking against the metal floor. The fleet still had no power. The whispers had not stopped. Every warrior aboard the thousands of ships could hear them now, murmuring in an ancient human language, crawling into their minds like unseen fingers. Some warriors clutched their heads, trying to shut them out. Others stood frozen, unable to move. These were hardened Draxian soldiers, conquerors who had raised entire civilizations without hesitation. But now, they were afraid. The ground forces had gone silent. Every attempt to contact them was met with nothing but static. The last transmission had been filled with screams, then a single chilling message. They are here. But who were they? The humans were supposed to be extinct. Earth was supposed to be defenseless. Then why was the most powerful fleet in the galaxy losing without even seeing the enemy? Varrock slammed his fist into the command table, his frustration turning to anger. Enough of this, he growled. We are warriors of the Empire. We do not fear ghosts. He turned to his second in command. Deploy more ground forces. Full assault. I want answers. Commander Accelerath hesitated. General, we don't even know what we're fighting. Varrock's yellow eyes glowed with fury. Then we will force them to show themselves. Reluctantly, the next wave of troops was sent down. Thousands of warriors landed in the abandoned cities, the ruins, the wastelands of Earth. Their orders were clear: search, secure, and destroy. Massive Draxian tanks rolled through the cracked streets. Squads moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready. But the deeper they advanced, the colder the air became. The mist thickened. The silence grew heavier. A squad marched through what looked like the ruins of an ancient human capital. Broken buildings loomed over them like silent watchers. The leader, Captain Vostor, signaled for a scan. Check for life forms, he commanded. The scanner operator tapped at his device, his claws clicking nervously. There's nothing, he said. No heat signatures, no movement. Vostor frowned. That didn't make sense. Even an abandoned world had life. Small creatures, insects, something. But Earth's cities were completely dead. It was as if nothing had lived here for centuries. Then, a sound. Not a voice, not a whisper. A deep mechanical hum vibrating through the ground. The warriors froze. Report. Vostor barked. The operator's voice was shaky. I don't know, sir. It's coming from beneath us. The ground trembled. Then, without warning, something enormous erupted from the ruins. A structure hidden beneath the city rose from the ground. A massive black monolith, humming with energy. It had no markings, no symbols, no sign of human origin. The air around it crackled with an unnatural force. The warriors instinctively stepped back, weapons raised. And then it opened its eyes. A blinding red glow burst from the monolith's surface. It was not a building. It was not a machine. It was something else. The whispers stopped, and a single voice, deep, mechanical, and ancient, spoke in the Draxian language. You should not have come. Then the world exploded into chaos. Something moved in the mist. Not one thing. Thousands. Shadowed figures rushed from the ruins with impossible speed. They did not run. They glided as if they were not fully part of this world. The warriors fired their weapons. Energy blasts vanished into the darkness. The enemy kept coming. The first screams echoed through the comms. Then more. Warriors were lifted into the air by unseen hands, their bodies twisted unnaturally before they vanished. Vostor barely had time to react before his own shadow moved. Something was behind him. Something cold. Something watching. His last sight before the darkness took him was the red eyes staring back at him from the mist. Above, on the flagship, Varrock listened to the desperate cries of his soldiers before they were silenced. His heart pounded. For the first time in his long, brutal life, he realized they had walked into a trap, and Earth was no longer their battlefield. It was their graveyard. You said. Varrock stood motionless on the bridge, his claws clenched so tightly his knuckles turned pale. The command deck was filled with the sounds of chaos. Officers frantically trying to restore power, warriors demanding updates, desperate attempts to reach the ground forces. But there was nothing. Every squad that had landed was gone, vanished. No bodies, no wreckage, no survivors. The planet had swallowed them whole. General, Commander Xelrath's voice was quieter than usual. This is no ordinary enemy. We should retreat while we still can. Varrock's eyes snapped toward him. Retreat. The very word burned his tongue. The Draxian Empire did not retreat. They had conquered every species they encountered. Their warships had reduced entire civilizations to dust. And now, a world that was supposed to be dead was defeating them without even showing its face. The whispers had stopped. The eerie silence that followed was somehow worse. It was the silence of something watching, waiting. Then the lights flickered. A single red glow pulsed across the bridge. A new transmission had arrived, not from a Draxian source, but from Earth. Varrock hesitated for the first time. He had heard many distress signals in his lifetime, many pleas for mercy, many broken voices begging for their lives. But this was different. Put it through, he ordered. The screens across the command deck lit up. The transmission was video. At first, it showed nothing but static. Then, slowly, a figure appeared. It was human, but it was not afraid. The man on the screen wore a uniform, though it was old, covered in dust. His face was calm, unreadable. His eyes, dark, hollow, endless, stared directly at Varrock, as if he could see him through the screen. And then the human smiled. "Welcome to Earth," the man said. His voice was steady, almost amused. "We were wondering when you'd come." Varrock's tail flicked in unease. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What is happening to my troops?" The human tilted his head slightly. "They are learning." A chill ran through the bridge. The Draxians did not understand fear, not the way weaker species did. But this was different. This was a warning. Varrock narrowed his eyes. "Enough games. We are the Draxian Empire. We do not fear ghosts. If you have an army, show it." The human smile didn't fade, but something in his expression changed. It was no longer amused. "You still don't understand, do you?" the man said softly. "You're not fighting an army." The lights across the bridge dimmed. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch. "You're fighting the remains of an empire that was never meant to die." The screen flickered. Images flashed. Ruined cities, empty streets, deep underground structures pulsing with energy. Then the final image. A warship. Not Draxian. Not like anything in the galaxy. Something ancient. Something monstrous. It loomed in the shadows of Earth's orbit, hidden until now. The transmission cut off. The bridge fell into complete silence. Every officer, every warrior aboard the flagship, felt it at the same time. They were not alone in orbit. Something else was up here with them. And it had just woken up. A sudden deep tremor rippled through the flagship. It was not an attack. It was something else. Varrock's claws tightened on the command table as he barked. "Report." An officer frantically checked the failing sensors. His voice shook. "General, there's a disturbance in orbit." Varrock's eyes narrowed. "What kind of disturbance?" The officer swallowed hard. "Something is moving." The command deck fell into a tense silence. Outside, in the cold void of space, the once empty orbit of Earth was no longer empty. At first, it was a flicker in the darkness, like shadows shifting against the stars. But then, the fleet's dimming scanners managed to register it. A warship. Massive. Silent. Awakening. It had been there all along, hiding in the depths of space, like a predator waiting for its prey to wander too close. The Draxian ships, mighty and invincible, were suddenly dwarfed by its presence. Varrock stepped closer to the viewing screen, his breath slow and controlled. This was impossible. It was human. But it was unlike any human warship recorded in history, a relic of an age before the Draxians had conquered the stars. The dark, ancient ship began to move, slowly, purposefully. It was not a derelict, not a ruin drifting in space. It was alive. A transmission cut through the silence, bypassing every security system in the fleet. The same human from before appeared on screen. But this time, he was not alone. Shadows moved behind him. Figures in old uniforms. Survivors. No, something else. You are not the first to come here, the human said, his voice eerily calm. You will not be the last. But you made the same mistake they did. Varrock forced his voice to remain steady. And what mistake is that? The human leaned in slightly, his eyes cold. You thought Earth was dead. A sharp alarm blared through the Draxian flagship. One of the warships in the fleet vanished from the scanners. No explosion. No distress signal. It was simply gone. Varrock turned sharply. What just happened? The officer's voice cracked with terror. One of our ships. It's missing. It's as if it was never there. Another alarm. Another ship gone. The fleet, the unstoppable armada of the Draxian Empire, was being erased. Varrock felt something he had never experienced before. Dread. The human on the screen exhaled slowly. You don't understand what you woke up, he said. But you will. Soon. The screen cut to black. And then, outside the fleet, the real war began. A sudden, deep tremor rippled through the flagship. It was not an attack. It was something else. Varrock's claws tightened on the command table as he barked. Report. An officer frantically checked the failing sensors. His voice shook. General, there's a disturbance in orbit. Varrock's eyes narrowed. What kind of disturbance? The officer swallowed hard. Something is moving. The command deck fell into a tense silence. Outside, in the cold void of space, the once empty orbit of Earth was no longer empty. At first, it was a flicker in the darkness, like shadows shifting against the stars. But then, the fleet's dimming scanners managed to register it. A warship. Massive. Silent. Awakening. It had been there all along, hiding in the depths of space, like a predator waiting for its prey to wander too close. The Draxian ships, mighty and invincible, were suddenly dwarfed by its presence. Varrock stepped closer to the viewing screen, his breath slow and controlled. This was impossible. It was human. But it was unlike any human warship recorded in history, a relic of an age before the Draxians had conquered the stars. The dark, ancient ship began to move, slowly, purposefully. It was not a derelict, not a ruin drifting in space. It was alive. A transmission cut through the silence, bypassing every security system in the fleet. The same human from before appeared on screen. But this time, he was not alone. Shadows moved behind him, figures in old uniforms. Survivors. No, something else. You are not the first to come here, the human said, his voice eerily calm. You will not be the last. But you made the same mistake they did. Varrock forced his voice to remain steady. And what mistake is that? The human leaned in slightly, his eyes cold. You thought Earth was dead. A sharp alarm blared through the Draxian flagship. One of the warships in the fleet vanished from the scanners. No explosion. No distress signal. It was simply gone. Varrock turned sharply. What just happened? The officer's voice cracked with terror. One of our ships. It's missing. It's as if it was never there. Another alarm. Another ship gone. The fleet, the unstoppable armada of the Draxian Empire, was being erased. Varrock felt something he had never experienced before. Dread. The human on the screen exhaled slowly. You don't understand what you woke up, he said. But you will. Soon. The screen cut to black. And then, outside the fleet, the real war began. The silence didn't last. A sudden shockwave ripped through the fleet. Warships trembled as unseen forces tore through space, like gravity itself had turned against them. Alarms screamed across every vessel, but there was no enemy ship in sight. Varrock staggered as the flagship lurched violently. The command deck flickered with failing lights. Officers scrambled to stabilize the ship, but the controls were unresponsive. Then, another warship vanished. One moment, it was there. The next, it was just gone. No wreckage, no explosion, just an empty void where it had been. Veruk's mind raced. This wasn't a battle. It was something worse. "General," an officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "Whatever is out there, it's—" The ship shook again. Outside, the dark shape of the ancient warship moved. It was not attacking in any conventional way. It was consuming. One by one, the Draxian warships were being pulled into the void. Veruk slammed his fist against the command table. "Activate emergency thrusters. Get us out of orbit. Now." But the controls were still dead. Something had locked them in place. And then, the whispers returned. But this time, they did not speak in riddles. "Stay." The word echoed through every ship, every mind, vibrating through the very hulls of the warships. It was not a command. It was a sentence. Veruk's breathing grew heavy. He was a warrior, a conqueror, a leader of the Draxian Empire. But in that moment, he felt small. The human transmission returned. The same man, the same eerie calm in his voice. "You came to conquer Earth," he said, "but you never asked what was left of it." The shadows behind him moved. Not people, not soldiers, something else. Veruk had seen many battlefields, had burned entire worlds, had crushed civilizations under his command. But he had never seen this. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice colder than before. The human's eyes darkened. "We are the last memory of humanity," he said, "and we do not forgive." The transmission cut off. Outside, the ancient warship finally revealed its true power. It was no longer just watching. It was hunting. "You said." The fleet was dying. Ship after ship vanished into the abyss, swallowed whole by the ancient force that lurked in Earth's orbit. The Draxian Empire, the most feared power in the galaxy, was being erased like it had never existed. Veruk's claws dug into the command table. His mind screamed for a solution, but there was none. They had walked into a war they didn't understand, against an enemy they couldn't fight, against something beyond war. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant, no longer fading in and out. "Stay. Learn. Suffer." The officers around him were shaking. Some had stopped moving altogether, their eyes wide and unfocused. Others clutched their heads, as if something was crawling into their minds. Then the ship's hull groaned. Something was outside. The flagship's sensors still showed nothing, but Veruk felt it. A presence. The ship was no longer just trapped, it was being washed. And then the lights went out. Total darkness swallowed the command deck. The hum of the engines, the beeping of the controls, everything fell silent. Except for the voice. The human's voice. It echoed through the ship, not from the speakers, not from the comms. From everywhere. "You came here to conquer," the voice said. "To burn our world. To wipe us from history." The darkness shifted. Shadows moved across the bridge, even though there was no light to cast them. But history remembers us, even when the galaxy tried to forget. Veruk's heart pounded. The darkness was alive. A red glow flickered to life ahead of him. No, not one. Many. Thousands of red eyes opened in the blackness, staring at him, staring through him. And then, they moved. Screams erupted across the ship as the shadows descended. Officers vanished in seconds, pulled into the dark with nothing but a strangled gasp. Others opened fire, but the bullets, the plasma rounds, the energy blasts, they hit nothing. The enemy was not solid. They were remnants, echoes, and they were angry. Veruk's vision blurred. His body felt cold. His mind slipped. The last thing he saw before the shadows reached him, the human on the screen, still smiling. "Welcome to our nightmare." The fleet was gone. The war was over, and Earth's true defenders had returned.